gotta go through immigration. You're gonna need your passport. Let's get through here.
I don't know. I left them somewhere.
Oh my God.
What are we doing now?
I don't know.
Just arriving today with his parents, and I feel so wow, like super happy and excited.
Forrest is not nervous because he is about to meet the love of his life. He is nervous because the most fragile part of his future is sitting 2 seats away from him, buckled in, fully alert, and emotionally loaded. And the tension in this moment has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with control. Because after 7 years of waiting, the real question is not whether Forrest and Sheena will finally touch, but whether Forrest is about to step into adulthood or get pulled back into a role he has never quite escaped. He has imagined this meeting for years, rehearsed it in quiet moments, probably told himself this is the day his life finally moves forward. Yet the irony is brutal, because the closer he gets to Sheena, the louder the presence of his mother becomes, not through words, but through energy, posture, expectation, the kind that fills space without asking permission. This is supposed to be the beginning of a love story, but the atmosphere feels more like a negotiation, and Forrest knows it, even if he cannot fully articulate it yet. 7 years is a long time to wait for anything, especially something as basic as holding the person you say you love, and when waiting stretches that long, it stops being romantic and starts becoming expensive, emotionally expensive, because walking away would mean admitting the wait itself was a mistake, and humans hate admitting that more than they hate being uncomfortable. Forrest is minutes from a payoff that carries weight far beyond a kiss, because once that kiss happens, once the fantasy becomes real, every unresolved issue becomes harder to ignore, and the first of those issues is already present, breathing, watching, judging. His mother is not here as background support. She is here as a variable, one that has already shown signs of volatility, especially when money enters the conversation. And money is never just money in these situations. It is power, leverage, proof of independence, and sometimes a threat. The story quietly sets this up without spelling it out. Because Forrest is unemployed, Sheena is earning, and somewhere in that imbalance sits a simple truth that makes certain parents deeply uncomfortable, which is the realization that their adult child is no longer financially dependent on them, but may still be emotionally dependent. And that creates a tug of war no one openly names. Sheena sending money to her own family should be a non-issue between adults. Yet it has already sparked anger, messages, resentment, and suspicion, which tells you this conflict was never about dollars. It was about authority, about who gets to decide what responsibility looks like and who gets to define what a future should cost. As the plane lands and the airport looms closer, the stakes rise without any dramatic music or forced suspense, because the tension is internal, layered, and personal, and Forrest begins to realize that this meeting will not be judged on whether it feels loving, but on whether it feels controllable. The kiss he has waited for is no longer just a kiss. It is a symbol, because once he chooses Sheena openly, once cameras capture that moment, something irreversible happens. And that something is not romance, it is alignment. Who he stands beside publicly matters more than anything he says privately, and he knows this, which is why his excitement carries an edge, a fear that feels too specific to be coincidence. The brilliance and cruelty of this moment is that it is quiet. No shouting, no accusations, no dramatic ultimatums yet, just proximity and anticipation, which is often where power struggles begin, because everyone is behaving, everyone is smiling, everyone is telling themselves, this is going to be fine, while mentally preparing for the moment it might not be. Forrest is stepping into a situation where love, loyalty, and independence collide, and none of those things like sharing space, especially when one person has waited 7 years to be chosen and another has spent years being the chooser. This is why the opening does not feel romantic, even though it should, because romance thrives on privacy, and nothing about this moment is private, not emotionally, not financially, not symbolically. And Forrest senses that the real test is not whether Sheena loves him, but whether he is ready to tolerate the discomfort that comes with choosing her when choosing her creates friction elsewhere. Somewhere ahead is a hug that looks soft, a kiss that looks gentle, and tears that look like relief. But layered beneath all of that is a shift that cannot be undone. Because once Forrest steps forward as a partner, he steps sideways away from being managed. And the question hanging in the air is not whether this meeting will go well, but whether everyone involved is prepared for what happens after the airport doors close. 7 years on screens does something subtle to people, because when connection lives inside rectangles and time zones, life starts pausing in ways no one plans. And Forrest's life did pause, not with drama or crisis, but with waiting that felt reasonable at first and then slowly turned into a habit. Video calls replaced touch, promises replaced plans, and the idea of a future stayed safely abstract, which is comforting when moving forward feels risky. Forrest did not grow into adulthood through milestones most people expect: steady work, independence, routine, responsibility, but through emotional loyalty, the kind built by showing up every day online and telling yourself consistency equals progress. Sheena, meanwhile, kept moving in the real world, earning, supporting herself, helping family when needed, building a life that existed off-screen. And none of this makes either person wrong, yet it creates an imbalance no amount of affection can erase. Long waiting encourages fantasy, because fantasy feels safer than testing reality, and over time, fantasy becomes heavy, not light, because leaving would mean admitting the dream outgrew the situation. Forrest waited so long that the relationship became part of his identity. And when something becomes identity, questioning, it feels like questioning yourself. Sheena's patience reads as devotion on the surface, yet patience also carries pressure, because the longer someone waits, the more return they expect, even if they never say it out loud. 7 years is not a neutral number. 7 years raises expectations silently. It turns hope into investment, and investments come with fear of loss. Money enters quietly, without villain music, and suddenly exposes what screens had softened. Forrest does not earn, Sheena does. That difference shapes decisions, tone, confidence even, posture, and it does so without cruelty or intention. Financial independence brings options. Dependence brings hesitation. Neither person caused this gap on purpose, yet both live inside it. When Sheena sends money to her family, the act looks ordinary to anyone living independently, but to someone whose adult life feels paused, it can feel threatening because it signals autonomy that does not ask permission. This is where patience starts turning into anxiety, and anxiety seeks control, even when no one admits it. The story presses here without blaming either side, because delayed adulthood often hides inside good intentions, loyalty, and fear of disappointing people who waited with you. Forrest, lack of work is not framed as failure, but as context. And context matters, because adulthood does not arrive on schedule for everyone, and emotional growth often outruns practical stability. Sheena's steady income is not framed as leverage, but independence changes dynamic, whether people want it to or not. Independence makes walking away possible, and possibility is unsettling for those who built safety around permanence. Waiting this long raises the cost of leaving to a point where staying feels easier, even when questions grow louder. Did this time build love, or did it build fear of starting over? Did patience strengthen commitment, or did it delay necessary discomfort? Forrest and Sheena both arrive at this meeting carrying those questions, even if neither voices them, because 7 years creates gravity, and gravity pulls harder the longer something stays suspended. What looks like devotion from the outside often hides avoidance underneath. Not of each other, but of the moment where fantasy meets friction. Screens protected them from the mess of daily life, from financial imbalance being visible, from family interference being unavoidable, from roles being tested. Now the wait ends, and with it ends the protection. The question hanging over everything is simple and unsettling. Did the waiting prepare them for reality, or did it protect them from learning whether reality works at all? Airports have a way of stripping people down to who they are under pressure. And the moment panic hits, all the polite smiles and careful optimism fall away, leaving instinct in charge. The missing passport does not feel like a small mistake, because nothing at this stage feels small. And when Molly realizes it is gone, the energy in the room changes immediately. Confusion turns to stress, stress turns to urgency, and suddenly the entire trip teeters on the edge of disaster. Not because a document is missing, but because the people involved react so differently to the problem. Forrest does not spiral. He does not raise his voice. He does not look to someone else for instruction. He steps forward, assesses the situation, and starts guiding everyone through it, and in that quiet shift, something important reveals itself. His parents freeze, Not dramatically, but enough to be noticeable. The roles invert in real time, with Forrest becoming the calm center while the adults who are supposed to support him look unsettled. This is not about competence in an airport, it is about emotional readiness, because crisis management exposes who carries responsibility when plans wobble. Forrest takes charge without asking permission, and no one resists, which suggests this is not the first time he has done so. The story reframes this moment as more than travel stress, because the missing passport becomes symbolic, a tangible expression of how easily control slips when anxiety takes over. As the search unfolds, there is an unspoken tension beneath the surface, because this meeting was already fragile, already loaded with expectation, and now it risks being delayed or derailed entirely. Forrest moves with purpose, coordinating, reassuring, absorbing stress, and protecting the moment he has waited 7 years for, not just from logistics but from emotional fallout. His focus is not on frustration but on resolution, which tells you something about how he operates. In relationships, especially under pressure, he does not retreat. He compensates. When the passport is finally found on the plane, relief washes over everyone, but relief does not erase the pattern that just played out. Forrest did not simply help. He led, and leadership under stress tends to repeat itself, because once someone shows they can carry weight, others often let them. This moment quietly asks a difficult question. If Forrest already manages crisis, who is he managing for? Is he stepping into the role of partner, or is he still being pulled into the role of caretaker for his parents? And what happens when those roles collide? The airport chaos ends, but the implications linger, because this was not an isolated incident. It was a rehearsal. It tested who stays grounded, who panics, and who absorbs the consequences, and Forrest absorbed them smoothly. The story presses on this without accusing anyone, because panic is human, and mistakes happen, yet patterns matter more than intention. If Forrest already plays husband in moments of stress, while also stabilizing his parent, the weight he carries doubles, and doubling weight over time cracks even the strongest patience. This scene subtly shifts the power dynamic, because competence breeds authority, and authority changes relationships whether people acknowledge it or not. Forrest steps into adulthood here not through romance, but through responsibility. And the question that lingers is uncomfortable. If Forrest is already managing crises before even meeting Sheena, how much of his future will involve holding everything together while others react? And more importantly, who benefits when one person becomes the steady one for everyone else? The bathroom becomes the quietest place he has had all day, and silence hits harder than noise, because it leaves room for thoughts he has been avoiding, the kind that do not shout, but sit heavy in the chest, pressing from the inside. Forrest looks at himself, not with vanity or confidence, but with focus, as if reminding himself who he needs to be in the next few minutes. And this moment matters, because it is the first time the audience sees him confront pressure without anyone else present. There is no performance here, no reassurance from Sheena. No direction from his parents, only the reality that whatever happens next will be shaped by how he handles the collision between loyalty and independence. Anxiety stacks quietly. He wants this meeting to be peaceful. He wants Sheena to feel safe. He wants his mother not to explode. Wanting all three at once is where tension lives, because peace between others often requires someone to swallow their own discomfort. Forrest knows Molly is upset, even if she is not in the room, because agitation does not need proximity to be felt. It travels through tone, posture, pauses, and the knowledge of past reactions. He is not afraid of confrontation itself. He is afraid of timing, because the wrong comment at the wrong moment could turn a milestone into a memory he cannot undo. This is where the story stops being about love and starts being about allegiance. Forrest is not choosing between people. He is choosing between patterns. Does he smooth things over by staying quiet? Does he prioritize harmony by absorbing tension? Does he protect the moment by minimizing his own needs? These questions sit behind every breath he takes, and none of them have easy answers, because loyalty to a parent and loyalty to a partner pull differently even when both feel justified. The pressure is not dramatic, but it is dense, the kind that comes from years of delayed decisions and untested boundaries. Forrest has spent a long time waiting, and waiting teaches compliance as much as patience, because it trains you to tolerate uncertainty instead of challenging it. Standing here, preparing to meet Sheena, he feels the cost of that training, because stepping forward now risks disrupting a balance that has existed for years, even if that balance was quietly unhealthy. Peace begins to look conditional, like something earned through silence rather than honesty. And Forrest senses this without fully naming it. He wants everyone to get along, yet he also knows peace that depends on suppression never lasts. Still, the urge to keep things calm is strong, because calm feels like success in moments meant to be joyful. As he leaves the bathroom, the question lingers without resolution. Is real peace built by speaking up early, or by staying quiet until the moment passes? Forrest does not answer it yet, but the weight of the question follows him out into the open, where love, expectation, and authority are about to meet, face to face. When the moment finally arrives, it does not explode with chaos or noise, it settles, and that softness is what makes it hit harder. Because after 7 years of waiting, Forrest and Sheena meet without rush, without spectacle, just two people closing a distance that had grown heavier with time. The hug looks gentle, almost cautious, like neither wants to break the reality by moving too fast, and in that pause, you can feel the weight of everything they carried into it. Expectations, fear, hope, and the quiet relief of knowing the other person exists outside a screen. Forrest does not grab, does not rush, does not perform, and Sheena mirrors that energy, steady and present, which makes the connection feel earned rather than staged. The kiss arrives the same way, careful, asked for, respected, and that detail matters more than romance, because permission signals intention, not insecurity. For Forrest, this is not about proving desire, it is about honoring the moment he waited years to reach, and the restraint shows how seriously he takes it. Emotion spikes here, not because it is dramatic, but because it is contained, and contained emotion often lands deeper. This is the payoff everyone expected, yet it does not close anything, it opens it, because once fantasy turns physical, the relationship becomes accountable to real life. Then the pivot happens quietly. The camera pulls back, and suddenly the focus shifts from the couple to the observers. Molly cries. Dev watches. The tears feel heavy, but they are not the tears of resolution. They are the tears of release, the kind that come when tension breaks. Temporarily, not permanently. Relief floods the room because nothing went wrong in this moment, because the hug did not trigger conflict, because the kiss did not cause an explosion, and because the day stayed intact. That relief gets mistaken for approval, yet approval requires clarity, and clarity is missing here. Dev stays mostly silent, observing, absorbing, and his presence feels stabilizing, but not decisive. He watches Molly, not Forrest, which says more than words could. Molly's tears soften her expression, and for a brief moment, everyone seems to believe the hardest part is over. Yet, softness does not equal surrender, and emotion does not equal agreement. Tears can signal relief that a feared outcome did not occur, not acceptance of what comes next. The story reframes this moment deliberately, because borrowed calm often feels like peace until the bill comes due. The hug succeeded. The kiss landed. The meeting did not implode. That does not mean the conflict dissolved, it means it paused. The underlying issues remain untouched. Money, boundaries, control, independence, and proximity will force them forward soon enough. For now, everyone breathes easier, not because things are resolved, but because they survived the first test. This calm is borrowed time, and borrowed time always expires. The question hanging over the room is not whether this reunion worked, but how long this softness can hold once daily life begins. When relief fades, when fatigue sets in, when proximity replaces anticipation, will the same restraint remain, or will the emotions that stayed quiet today demand space tomorrow? When the moment finally arrives, it does not explode with chaos or noise, it settles, and that softness is what makes it hit harder. Because after 7 years of waiting, Forrest and Sheena meet without rush, without spectacle, just two people closing a distance that had grown heavier. With time, the hug looks gentle, almost cautious, like neither wants to break the reality by moving too fast, and in that pause, you can feel the weight of everything they carried into it. Expectations, fear, hope, and the quiet relief of knowing the other person exists outside a screen. Forrest does not grab, does not rush, does not perform, and Sheena mirrors that energy, steady and present, which makes the connection feel earned rather than staged. The kiss arrives the same way, careful, asked for, respected, and that detail matters more than romance, because permission signals intention, not insecurity. For Forrest, this is not about proving desire, it is about honoring the moment he waited years to reach, and the restraint shows how seriously he takes it. Emotion spikes here, not because it is dramatic, but because it is contained, and contained emotion often lands deeper. This is the payoff everyone expected, yet it does not close anything, it opens it. Because once fantasy turns physical, the relationship becomes accountable to real life. Then the pivot happens quietly. The camera pulls back, and suddenly the focus shifts from the couple to the observers. Molly cries, Dev watches. The tears feel heavy, but they are not the tears of resolution, they are the tears of release. The kind that come when tension breaks, temporarily, not permanently. Relief floods the room, because nothing went wrong in this moment, because the hug did not trigger conflict, because the kiss did not cause an explosion, and because the day stayed intact. That relief gets mistaken for approval, yet approval requires clarity, and clarity is missing here. Dev stays mostly silent, observing, absorbing, and his presence feels stabilizing, but not decisive. He watches Molly, not Forrest, which says more than words could. Molly's tears soften, her expression, and for a brief moment, everyone seems to believe the hardest part is over. Yet, softness does not equal surrender, and emotion does not equal agreement. Tears can signal relief that a feared outcome did not occur, not acceptance of what comes next. The story reframes this moment deliberately, because borrowed calm often feels like peace until the bill comes due. The hug succeeded. The kiss landed. The meeting did not implode. That does not mean the conflict dissolved. It means it paused. The underlying issues remain untouched. Money, boundaries, control, independence, and proximity will force them forward soon enough. For now, everyone breathes easier, not because things are resolved, but because they survived the first test. This calm is borrowed time, and borrowed time always expires. The question hanging over the room is not whether this reunion worked, but how long this softness can hold once daily life begins. When relief fades, when fatigue sets in, when proximity replaces anticipation, will the same restraint remain, or will the emotions that stayed quiet today demand space tomorrow? Money enters the story without raising its voice, and that is exactly why it carries so much weight, because no one is arguing about amounts or budgets. They are reacting to what money represents when it moves without permission. Sheena sending money to her family is framed by some as generosity, by others as irresponsibility, yet the reaction it triggers says less about the transaction and more about who feels entitled to approve it. When an adult woman earns her own income and chooses to support people she loves, the decision should be simple. Yet, simplicity disappears when another person believes they hold a stake in her future choices. The discomfort here is not financial. It is territorial. Molly's reaction reveals a fear many parents never say out loud, which is the fear that resources meant for a shared future are being redirected elsewhere, and in that fear sits an assumption that future plans require supervision. From her perspective, concern looks like protection, and protection feels justified when a child has struggled to establish independence. Forrest not. Working complicates this dynamic further, because when one partner earns and the other does not, outsiders often feel licensed to comment, advise, or interfere, even when no one asked. Responsibility becomes a moving target, defined not by age or autonomy, but by who appears stable enough to be trusted. The story challenges easy judgments by refusing to villainize either side. Sheena's choice to help her family does not mean she is careless with her future, and Molly's worry does not automatically make her controlling. Parents who fear exploitation often believe they are acting out of love, not dominance, especially when distance and unfamiliar cultures are involved. Concern grows faster when money crosses borders, because unfamiliarity breeds suspicion, and suspicion seeks reassurance through control. This counterpoint matters, because ignoring it would flatten the conflict into something simpler than it is. Yet the core tension remains unresolved, because concern becomes problematic when it demands authority over adult decisions. The question is not whether risk exists in every relationship, but who gets to decide which risks are acceptable. Adults learn through consequences, not permission, and when someone tries to shield another adult from risk entirely, they often strip them of agency in the process. Sheena is not asking for approval. She is exercising choice, and the reaction to that choice exposes a struggle over ownership of the future. Whose future is being protected here? Forrest, Sheena's, or a version of stability imagined by someone watching from the outside? When money becomes the battleground, It reveals who believes they have veto power. Sheena's independence challenges the idea that security comes from compliance, and that challenge unsettles those who equate oversight with care. The story presses on this tension gently but firmly, because responsibility without autonomy is not responsibility. It is management. The loop tightens around a simple but uncomfortable question. When two adults build a future together, who decides which risks are worth taking, the people living it or the people fearing the outcome? As this question hangs unanswered, the calm from the reunion begins to feel thinner, because money does not forget, and control once asserted rarely retreats quietly. Living together changes the temperature of everything, because anticipation survives distance, but proximity demands answers, and one apartment with 4 adults removes the illusion of choice faster than any argument ever could. There is no hallway to escape into. No neutral ground, no polite ending to an uncomfortable moment, just shared space where every look, pause, and comment lands harder because there is nowhere to set it down. The story shifts here because the airport offered ceremony, but the apartment offers reality, and reality has no soundtrack. Boundaries blur quickly when routines collide, and what felt manageable for a few hours suddenly becomes constant exposure. Cohabitation turns small opinions into daily friction, especially when roles remain undefined. Who decides schedules? Who comments on money? Who asks questions no one requested? The teasers hint at invasive curiosity, the kind disguised as humor or concern, questions that cross lines while pretending not to see them, and this matters because invasion rarely announces itself honestly. It arrives as interest, advice, jokes, and the expectation of access. Forrest begins to feel this shift almost immediately, because being a partner in public is easier than defending that partnership in private, especially under a roof where authority once lived comfortably. Forrest starts speaking back, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to be noticed. And this is where delayed individuation shows its cost. Growth postponed does not disappear, it compresses. And when it finally surfaces, it often does so under pressure. Forrest is learning to assert boundaries later than most, and late learning carries sharper edges because the habits around him formed when he was quieter. The resistance he meets is not new hostility. It is confusion. The confusion of someone realizing the rules changed without a meeting. The story frames this shift carefully, because pushing back does not mean rejecting care, and asserting independence does not erase gratitude. Forrest is not becoming rebellious. He is becoming visible, and visibility disrupts systems built around predictability. When someone who used to absorb tension begins redirecting it, the entire dynamic recalibrates. And recalibration often feels like conflict to those who benefited from the old balance. One apartment forces everyone to confront expectations they never said out loud. Molly expects input. Sheena expects respect. Forrest expects peace. These expectations cannot coexist indefinitely without negotiation. And negotiation requires friction. Delayed individuation means Forrest did not practice this earlier, so the learning curve steepens now when stakes are higher and patience thinner. The story presses on whether growth delayed creates a sharper conflict, because catching up emotionally often happens in bursts, not gradual steps. As days stack, the borrowed calm from the reunion thins further. Silence stops working. Deflection loses effectiveness. Forrest's voice grows steadier, and with it grows resistance. Not because he seeks confrontation, but because avoiding it no longer protects what he values. The unanswered question lingers in every shared room. When growth arrives late, does it strengthen relationships through honesty, or does it break them under the weight of years spent waiting? Molly's position becomes clearer when the noise fades, because beneath the sharp reactions and visible tension sits a fear most parents never admit, the fear of becoming optional. Watching a child form a primary bond elsewhere can feel less like growth and more like erasure, especially when identity has been shaped around guidance, protection, and decision-making for years. Control does not always announce itself as dominance. It often enters quietly through responsibility, through the belief that oversight equals care. And when that belief has worked for a long time, releasing it can feel like negligence rather than respect. From Molly's side, the threat is not Sheena as a person. It is displacement, the shift from being the central emotional reference point to becoming one voice among many can feel abrupt even when it has been years in the making. Authority tied to care is hard to loosen because it once served a purpose, and when a child struggled or stalled, stepping in felt necessary. Forest. Delayed independence reinforces this pattern because prolonged involvement blurs the line between support and management, and habits formed in uncertainty rarely dissolve cleanly. The narration stays fair here because concern for a son is not inherently wrong, especially when finances, distance, and unfamiliar circumstances are involved. Worry does not equal malice. Many parents fear their child being taken advantage of, losing stability, or making irreversible choices before they are ready. Those fears intensify when money moves across borders or when a partner appears more established because imbalance triggers instinctive protection. This counterpoint matters because dismissing it would ignore a real emotional experience. Yet the problem emerges when concern insists on control rather than communication. When questions become interrogation. When advice becomes expectation. When involvement assumes permanence rather than consent. Sabotage does not always look intentional. Sometimes it looks like hovering, questioning timing, creating discomfort under the banner of care. The impact matters more than the intention, because repeated interference can weaken trust, even when it comes from fear rather than hostility. Molly's identity appears tightly woven with being needed, and when that need shifts, anxiety rises. Anxiety seeks reassurance, and reassurance often arrives through influence. The behavior pattern suggests a struggle to redefine purpose in a changing dynamic, not a desire to harm. Still, redefining purpose requires letting go, and letting go feels risky when past outcomes. Validated intervention. The loop tightens around an uncomfortable possibility. Concern meant to protect can end up destabilizing the very thing it fears losing. When involvement creates tension pushes others closer together, accelerating the shift it resists. The question becomes unavoidable. At what point does concern stop being support and start becoming obstruction? And once that line is crossed, even unintentionally, can it be walked back without damage? The pattern becomes harder to ignore as days move forward because choices begin repeating in quieter forms, and repetition turns moments into direction. Forrest starts choosing timing over obedience, not in grand declarations, but in pauses, in delayed responses, in the way he decides when to speak rather than whether he is allowed to. This shift looks small from the outside, yet it carries weight because timing is a form of power. Choosing when to engage signals autonomy without open defiance, and Forrest leans into it carefully, aware that sudden rebellion would trigger the very conflict he hopes to avoid. Sheena, meanwhile, chooses peace over self-defense more often than she should have to. And this choice reads as grace at first, because harmony feels productive in a shared space. She lets comments slide. She redirects tension. She absorbs discomfort without returning it. These are not weaknesses, they are strategies. But strategies come with cost, especially when they become habitual. Each moment of silence buys temporary calm, yet it also teaches others where the boundary sits, and boundaries left undefined tend to drift inward. Small compromises begin stacking, the kind no one notices until weight accumulates. Forrest delays confronting certain remarks. Sheena postpones correcting assumptions. Molly continues to test access, not aggressively, but persistently, because no one has told her to stop clearly enough to change course. These behaviors echo earlier loops. The waiting from 7 years ago returns in a new form. The money tension resurfaces indirectly. The borrowed calm from the reunion thins further. Each unresolved thread tightens instead of loosens. The story starts paying off its earlier questions. Waiting did build love, but it also built fear of disruption. Crisis management revealed Forrest's readiness, yet readiness without boundaries creates overload. Silence preserved moments, but silence now demands payment in emotional strain. Calm remains present, but it feels brittle, like glass held together by careful handling rather than strength. Forrest senses this fragility. He knows obedience no longer fits, yet full confrontation feels premature. Timing becomes his compromise, but timing only works temporarily. Sheena feels the expense of peace growing heavier because defending oneself later costs more than speaking early, and each unchallenged moment raises the emotional price of correction. Neither wants to trigger a rupture, yet both feel the tension rising toward inevitability. Silence begins to feel expensive because it no longer protects the relationship, it protects discomfort. The cost shows up in restraint and emotional labor and the careful navigation of everyday interactions. Calm looks intact, yet it depends on effort that cannot be sustained indefinitely. The story edges toward a truth no one says out loud. Compromise without clarity does not resolve conflict, it delays it, and delayed conflict rarely arrives gently. Nothing collapses at the end, and nothing magically fixes itself either, which is the most honest outcome this story could offer. The kiss happened, the meeting worked, the moment Forrest waited 7 years for became real, physical, undeniable, and in that sense, it succeeded. No, one stormed off. No lines were crossed beyond repair. Everyone made it through the airport, through the hugs, through the first emotional test, and on paper, that looks like a win. Yet wins that come with conditions tend to age poorly, and the conflict does not disappear just because. The cameras capture a soft ending. What survives this moment is not resolution, but structure. The same dynamics remain intact, only closer now, louder, harder to avoid. Love did not fail here. It showed up exactly as promised. What failed to resolve was control. Because control rarely announces an exit politely. It waits, it adapts. It finds new settings to express itself once old ones close. Forrest proved he can step forward when it counts. Sheena proved she can stay composed under pressure. Molly proved she can hold emotion without exploding, at least for a moment. None of that cancels the underlying struggle over authority, independence, and whose comfort shapes the household. This ending lands emotionally because it does not fake triumph. Forrest did not suddenly become fully independent. Molly did not suddenly let go. Sheena did not suddenly draw firm lines. Growth does not arrive in clean arcs when it is delayed. It arrives unevenly, under stress, sometimes too late to prevent friction. Independence, when postponed, shows up abruptly, and abrupt change unsettles systems built on predictability. Love waited patiently. Control did not. The clean insight sits quietly beneath everything. Delayed love often inherits delayed conflict. The longer people wait to choose themselves, the harder that choice becomes for everyone around them. Forrest's adulthood is arriving late, not because he avoided it, but because waiting felt safer than risking loss. Now adulthood is here anyway, arriving in shared apartments, financial tension, and emotional negotiations that cannot be postponed again. Whether independence arrives gently or painfully depends on how honestly it is handled next. The story does not end at the airport, because airports are ceremonial spaces designed for hellos and goodbyes, not real life. Real life begins when doors close, when there is no audience, when silence replaces anticipation, and when patterns have room to repeat themselves without interruption. That is where this relationship will be tested for real. Not by distance or waiting, but by proximity and choice. The next chapter does not ask whether Forrest and Sheena love each other. That question has already been answered. The question waiting in the quiet is simpler and more dangerous. What happens when love no longer has distance to protect it, and independence demands space inside the same four walls?